Your alarm goes off. You groan. You already know the shape of the day ahead. Meetings, deadlines, a boss checking if you're online. This is what a day means to you. But for almost the entire span of human history, none of that existed. No alarm, no boss, no 9 to 5. And the real answer to what filled those ancient days is far stranger than you've been told. You've probably imagined it as a grim slog. Waking up hungry, scanning the horizon for food. Working from sunrise to exhaustion just to survive another night. That's the story you were handed in school. Prehistoric life as one long desperate shift with no clock-out time. But what if that story is almost completely backwards? In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee did something nobody had really done before. He followed the Jew/Hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert and simply counted their hours. Not their calories, not their tools, their time. What he found stunned him. Adults spent around 15 hours a week gathering food. 15. Add cooking and tool repair and the number crept up, but it still fell far short of anything resembling a modern work week. 15 hours. Let that sit for a second. You probably spend more time than that just commuting and answering emails before lunch on Wednesday. Lee's data fed directly into one of the most quietly radical ideas in anthropology. A researcher named Marshall Sahlins looked at findings like this and coined a phrase that flipped the entire narrative. He called hunter-gatherer societies the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff. They had almost nothing you'd recognize as stuff. Affluent because they wanted almost nothing they didn't already have. Think about that distinction for a moment. Affluence isn't only about accumulation. It's about the gap between what you want and what you've got. Close that gap and you're rich, even with empty pockets. Widen it endlessly and you can own everything and still feel poor. Which side of that gap do you think most of us live on today? So if they weren't working themselves to exhaustion, what were they actually doing with the other hours? This is where the picture gets vivid and honestly a little enviable. They talked. A lot. Anthropologists who lived among the Jew/Hoansi and later among groups like the Hadza in Tanzania describe long, unstructured hours of conversation. Gossip, storytelling. Arguments settled through humor rather than authority. Talking wasn't a break from the real work of survival. In many ways, it was the work. It built trust. It shared knowledge about where water pooled after rain or which plants turned toxic in dry seasons. It kept the group bonded tightly enough to survive the next crisis together. They rested. Not the guilty, scrolling your phone kind of rest you sneak in during a lunch break. Long, unhurried stretches of doing nothing in particular. Naps in the shade, sitting, watching children play. There was no manager measuring their output. There was no metric for laziness, because laziness as a moral failing hadn't been invented yet. They played. Adults played games with rules passed down for generations. Children mimicked hunting and gathering in ways that doubled as both fun and education, learning the exact skills they'd need without ever sitting through anything resembling a classroom. And they made things, but on their own rhythm. Beads, decorated tools, personal ornaments that served no survival function at all, beyond meaning something to the person who wore them. Why would a species constantly fighting for survival spend precious hours carving a shell into jewelry? Here's the twist your brain probably wasn't expecting. The invention of agriculture, the moment we usually celebrate as the great leap forward for humanity, may have made daily life harder, not easier. Once people settled down to farm, work hours climbed. Farming demands relentless scheduled labor, planting seasons, harvest deadlines, storage to defend. fields to weed under a punishing sun, day after day, with no room for a 15-hour week. Skeletal remains from early agricultural societies show something else too. Shorter stature, more disease, more signs of malnutrition than their hunter-gatherer ancestors who'd eaten a wildly varied diet of whatever the land offered that season. So why did humans ever make that trade? Population pressure, climate shifts. The simple fact that farming once started could feed more mouths per acre, even if it made each of those mouths work harder and live rougher. Progress, in other words, isn't always about getting a better life. Sometimes it's just about getting a more crowded one. The Hadza of Tanzania offer a living echo of this older rhythm even now. James Suzman, an anthropologist who spent years living among them, documented a life still built around unhurried mornings, communal meals, and long unstructured afternoons, even as the modern world presses in from every direction. Suzman's research kept circling back to one uncomfortable question for the rest of us. If humans spent the overwhelming majority of our existence working only a fraction of the hours we work now, why do we treat constant busyness as the natural, inevitable condition of being human? It isn't natural, it's recent. Astonishingly recent. Consider the timeline for a second. Homo sapiens have existed for roughly 300,000 years. Agriculture is maybe 12,000 years old. The factory job, the office cubicle, the concept of clocking in and clocking out, all of that is barely 200 years old. On the timeline of your own species, the 8-hour workday is a blink, a rounding error. And yet, it feels like the only way life has ever been organized, because it's the only way you've ever lived it. That's not to say ancient life was some flawless utopia. It carried real dangers. Modern life doesn't. Predators, injury without antibiotics, infant mortality that would be unthinkable today. Nobody's arguing you should trade your bathroom and your painkillers for a hut and a spear. But the myth of the exhausted, overworked caveman grinding from dawn to dusk just to scrape by doesn't hold up against the evidence. In many documented hunter-gatherer societies, survival took a surprisingly small slice of the day, and the rest belonged to rest, relationships, and play. So here's the real question buried underneath all of this. If your ancient ancestors could meet their needs in 15 hours and spend the remaining time talking, resting, and simply being present with the people around them, what exactly are you spending the other 40 hours on? Some of it is obvious. Rent doesn't pay itself. Some of it is less obvious. Layers of want stacked on top of need until the two become impossible to tell apart. A bigger house, a newer phone, a promotion that buys you nothing but more meetings. Your ancestors weren't lazy. They weren't primitive in the way that word usually implies either. They'd simply drawn a different line between enough and more, and they mostly chose to stop at enough. Tonight, when you finally close your laptop after another long day, it's worth sitting with that distinction for just a moment. Somewhere in your genetic memory is a version of you who worked 15 hours a week and called that a full life. The alarm clock isn't ancient. The grind isn't ancient. What's ancient is knowing when to stop.